Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Unstructured with YoungYoda. This time I'll be reading from one of my favorite Reddit pages, r/glitch_in_the_matrix, or Glitch in the Matrix, which labels itself as eyewitness events that cannot be explained with critical thinking. Go check it out if you get a chance. It's currently at 405,000 members and counting. Again, these are said to be actual accounts that cannot be explained, but we know how Reddit is sometimes. So take all these stories with a grain of salt. They're fun and entertaining, but they may not be honest all the time. So let's go ahead and dive in. First story comes from u/Neyvan60, Neyvan 60, titled, "Me and my daughter witnessed something surreal and unexplainable today." For a few weeks before this, while out driving, I've observed pedestrians standing at the traffic lights who will reach into their pocket and look at their phone as they're walking across the road when the light goes green. Nothing significant or strange about this, just one of those mundane things you notice while going out in your day. Today I was driving with my daughter and we stopped at a red light at a crossing and there was a man standing there. Nothing out of the ordinary, denim jacket, black cap, glasses, around 6'2". I thought I'd try to weird out my young daughter, she's 5, so I knew I was going to blow her damn mind. So I said, "See that man? When the walking man goes green and he starts to walk across, he'll reach into his pocket and pull out his phone and start looking at it. Watch and see." As he walks across, he reaches into his pocket, but then immediately takes his hand out and looks and points right at me with his mouth open, smiling like a gotcha stance. Of course, my daughter found this absolutely hilarious, and I sat there completely mind blown. I must have sat there in silence looking at him walk across for the next 10 seconds. I drove on and had a look at him as I drove past, and he was smirking/laughing. I've been playing it through my head all day. The windows were up. The radio was on. I wasn't shouting. My voice was not even remotely raised. He must have been about 15 to 20 feet away from me. I can't figure out at all how he could have heard me. Sorry about that. It's literally impossible. How did he know I was trying to predict he'd reach into his pocket for his phone? The only even remote possibility I can think of is that he's had the same observation as me and thought I might be thinking the same thing, so just went for it. But realistically, what are even the chances of this? Yeah, that's not unsettling in any way. I like Hulk Diggity's first comment after this. I like the idea that this guy does the same thing every time he crosses the street, and it all paid off today. I'm sticking with that. So shout out to Hulk Diggity. On to the next one from u/Red Leaders, titled, "I died in late 2015. I was given a second chance." I've never used Reddit before, but a friend of mine was talking to me about the Glitch in the Matrix subreddit, so I decided to share my story here, since I don't have any explanation for it almost 3 years later. Rewind back to September 2015. I was a freshman who had just entered high school 2 weeks prior. Already school was weighing down on me. I've been continuing a habit I had, going on walks to clear my mind. On this day, I'd been walking around a pond near my house. There's a trail that goes around the pond, and then the trail leads up to a set of abandoned train tracks on the other side, which sit about 15 feet above the path and pond below. After walking the circle, I was crossing the train tracks when I decided I wanted some ice cream. The fastest way to get to the ice cream shop was to take the path below the train tracks, but there isn't any way to cross the pond without going all the way back around. And being 14 years old, I decided that I could just jump from the tracks onto the path below and keep walking. Looking down from above, it didn't seem to be that far of a jump. So that's what I did. Smart plan there. The next thing I remember after that was being half conscious in an ambulance. Everything was extremely blurry, and the paramedics sounded slightly panicked. I wasn't able to move either of my legs, so I think they were both broken. This scene continued on for a few minutes, until we arrived at the hospital and I was wheeled into the emergency room on a stretcher. I only had a few minutes in emergency before I eventually lost all consciousness, and that was the last thing I saw. After I'd been unconscious for what felt like an hour, I opened my eyes and I was on the ground. I just hit the ground after jumping, but this time I was fully conscious. I didn't notice this before I jumped, but there had been a car parked watching me. I think they thought I was attempting suicide, but it probably looked that way. And the people in it had jumped out and called an ambulance for me. The ambulance ride had been the exact same way as it was the first time. I was put into the same emergency room that I had died in before. The only difference between the two events were that I was fully conscious this time. My injuries were much more minor. I was discharged from the hospital the same night, with only stitches in my lip, a slightly fractured jaw, and a mild concussion. For a while after this, I assumed that the first scenario had just been a weirdly coincidental dream that I had had while I was unconscious, so I didn't consider it anything abnormal. It wasn't until a few weeks after when my mom told me that the people who had helped me said that I had been conscious the entire time. I hadn't been knocked out after hitting the ground or anything, so that entire scenario managed to happen in the few seconds it took for me to hit the ground while I was still conscious. Anyways, I'm not very good at describing things, especially with how blurry this day was now that it was years ago, but I'm 17 now. I still have no way to explain what happened that day, other than I died and was given a second chance. May we all get second chances like this, especially for all the stupid 14-year-olds who think they're superhuman. Remember, kids, don't do it for the Vine, or TikTok now, I guess. Anyways, on to our third glitch, probably my favorite out of this whole bunch. Now, this one hits you right in the heartstrings. Coming from you, Banana Toast, please, spelled B-A-N-A-N-A. This shit is banana. Toastpls, with the post titled, My Nan is a Bit Weird. So I'll start by saying, I'm not sure if this is the right sub, and I know it's nowhere near as epic as many stories on here, but whilst reading this sub, it made me think of my Nan, so I had to share. You can tell they're British, because they use the word Nan. So this happened to my Nan all the time, usually small things. Last week I was driving my son to school, and she said, make sure you shut the door. He's going to shut his finger in it. So I shut the car door, and sparked it up to her being old. 20 minutes later, the school phoned to say he'd shut his thumb in the hinge of the fire door, and later at A&E, we found out he'd broken his thumb joint. She literally does it all the time with a 75 to 80% success rate, but this is my favorite one. My Nan was a post-war baby. Born in London in 1945, she lived in the basement of a 4-story Victorian house. Her mother's whole family had been killed by a bomb whilst her mother had been at the GP surgery, finding out she was pregnant with my Nan. Her father was in the army prison until she was 6, so her and her mom had a tough life. Anyway, from the age of about 4, she always had this dream. The dream would be her looking out of a window and seeing miles and miles of fields and pine trees. As a kid, she's always thought that this was the most beautiful scene she'd ever seen, but couldn't brush off the feeling of dread and heartbreak that accompanied the dream. Later, the dream got more detailed, and eventually she got the letters K135. She had the dream at least 6 times, always the same. She said the last time she had this dream, she was sitting in the car with my granddad. She was only 16 and zoned out. Had the whole dream and zoned back in, and only 20 seconds had passed. The last time, she tried to touch the window. Her hand came into the frame, but it wasn't the hand of a 16-year-old. It was older, drier, and more wrinkled. She never really brushed the dream off, to be honest. She had K135 written in the kitchen door frame for my entire life, and probably years before I was born also. She always told me of the dream, but I always thought it was nothing. She kept trying to explain how she never felt asleep. It felt like a time lapse, not a dream. And she always wanted to know where the view was. In 2006, my parents found out they were expecting their 6th child. She was an accident, lol. And they'd need to move house to fit us all. May 2006, Kay was born. January 2007, my parents moved house, and my grandparents helped us get moved in. My granddad, only age 63, helped with all the heavy lifting, painting, etc., whilst my Nan watched us kids. 4 weeks later, my Nan went to visit the completed house, and my granddad was super excited to take her to visit my baby sister Kay's room. He'd worked really hard, building her furniture, painting her walls, installing her light fittings, but my Nan didn't see all his hard work. All she saw was a massive K painted above the window frame, and the view she'd seen so many times since she was a kid. She knew something hard was going to happen. She told us all, and we just did the standard, yeah, okay. 4 weeks later, my granddad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. They'd been married 43 years. No one could believe it. He deteriorated fast. About 6 weeks later, my Nan phoned a taxi firm to get a taxi to visit my granddad, as she had every day since his diagnosis. It was an automated message. Thank you for calling blank taxis. If you would like a taxi from your home address of blank, please press 1. Presses 1. Thank you for using blank taxis. Your booking reference is 135. Your taxi will be dispatched shortly. That was the last time she saw my granddad alive. She said she knew before she got there, and she was glad she got to say goodbye properly. She said she'd spent 60 years preparing for this moment, and she doesn't think she'd have coped otherwise. A week later, her and my mom went to sign the death certificate. When they come home, my little sister asked my nun to come and play in her bedroom. She went upstairs and broke down in front of the window. She reached out and touched the glass, and she swears to this day her hand was that of a teenager's. Her wedding ring wasn't present, and it's been on her finger for 43 years at this point. There wasn't a wrinkle in sight, and she blinked, and it was back to normal. She always tells the story. She has had a lot of glitches. I'll make another post another day if I have time, but this is definitely the most prolific one she's had. And if that doesn't give you goosebumps, I don't know what will. Oh my God. Almost getting tears from that. And the last post I'll read for this episode anyway. And I'm sure I'll revisit this to read some more for you guys. Because I love this Reddit page. I mean, seriously. And like I said before, you have to take some of these stories with a grain of salt, as it could just be creative writing assignments for all we know. But it's more fun to believe that these are stories that actually happened. But for the last one, it comes from you/better_late_than, titled, Saw Myself in a Crib, Completing a Memory I've Had My Entire Life. When I was about 2, a woman walked into my room with a shirtless man and peered into my crib. Her face twisted with horror and shock as she backed out of the room and screamed in the hallway. The memory followed me my entire life. It was one of the earliest I had and one of the most vivid. My mother said someone on drugs broke into the house and my dad chased them out. I'm not going to smudge the fact that I took a heavy amount of acid one night, just for fun when I was 21, and that I know it can alter the way someone takes in things as real and not real. I never thought more of LSD than just a fun trick of the brain, but this experience made me ward it off completely. I was camping, walked off at night like a moron, became lost in the woods. I realized the danger I was in because I was tripping pretty badly and knew the best thing to do was stay still and wait, even though time felt warped. I waited under a tree with my head tucked into my lap. When I looked up, I saw a red door just standing freely about 15 feet away. I couldn't not walk to it. LSD was fun to me. I liked seeing what would happen. I didn't know at the time the fact that it felt as if I was not tripping. Time felt intact. There was nothing out of place other than the door. All right, Stephen King. I walked through it and found myself standing in a small living room with walls that had wood paneling and smelled like pot roast. I walked into the kitchen, admiring the checkered floors and collection of McDonald's cups with various cartoon characters on them. Eventually, I wandered down the hall, and that's when things became fucky. It suddenly felt real, like I could be caught and punished. I ducked into a small room that was decorated like a nursery, and as soon as I saw the crib, I knew. I looked over the rail, and there was my younger self looking back up at me. I felt panicked as I turned around and began to quickly leave the home. My husband was standing behind me in the hall. He said something, but it was like no air could pass between us to carry the noise. I ran past him. I wanted to see my parents. The door at the end of the hall flew open, and there was my father, his eyes wide with fear, and he looked right into mine. He yelled, "Get the fuck out!" I began to scream. I wanted to hug him, to tell him it was me. I was so fucking scared I didn't want to hurt anyone. My mom appeared behind him with a handgun. I said, "Dad, it's me, Mom." But she held the gun up, and I ran for the door. When I opened it, there was no night sky, no dimly lit porch, just a vast amounts of color that I can only remember as white. I can only visually recall the color white, but I remember the inner dialogue of being overwhelmed by color and trying to grasp physical space. Eventually, as the acid wore off, memory returned and I was tucked into a sleeping bag in the cabin. My husband came looking for me and said he found me clinging to a tree, and I remained catatonic until I fell asleep. It took me a long time to talk about it with anyone, but I asked my mom one day to tell me more about what happened that night. She chased the intruders from our home, and she said the woman looked scared. She called out, "Dad, Mom," to us, and that made it hard for me to point a gun at her. Thank God it scared them off, because I don't think I could have pulled that trigger looking at her. She's someone's daughter, too. Found out about 4 weeks after that trip that I was 15 weeks pregnant, after being told my PCOS made it nearly impossible to have kids without medical assistance. I am 100% in agreement that the effects of LSD can do some super crazy shit to a person. I know what I felt. I know what I saw. I just don't understand what the fuck happened. Edit. Whoa, didn't expect this to blow up. I posted this really late from my phone as I was going to bed. Sorry if it reads weird. I was just trying to get out while remaining coherent. I'm really sad I didn't get to respond to any of the comments. I didn't realize intoxicants are a no-no here. My bad. Like I said before, I totally realized that the presence of LSD really affects the legitimacy of my experience. I didn't ask my mom what the woman looked like because I know any sort of bias can affect the way she remembers things. It makes it invalid. What did make her conversation valid was the way she described things lines up perfectly with my experience without sharing my experience with her whatsoever. I didn't know until that conversation that she even had a gun. Thanks for reading. All right, guys. So we've come to the end of this episode. I hope you've all enjoyed these glitches in the Matrix. Again, I will revisit this page because I love this page. Also, I hope you check it out when you get some free time. Again, it's r/glitch_in_the_matrix. And I guess now I'll get into housekeeping. You can find me on Twitter at randomgerm101, but I would much prefer you give a follow to @thenerdcores_, which hosts this show and other great shows such as Ladies and Nerdcores and the Empiric Files. Follow us on Instagram @thenerdcores, and you can find all this information and more at our new website, www.thenerdcores.com, where we even have blog posts now. So Raul has a few blog posts coming up. I will be doing a review for Bad CGI Sharks. Be sure to check out our podcast episode where we interviewed the directors of Bad CGI Sharks for the Nerdy Chicano show. If you'd like to catch episodes on the Nerd Course podcast feed early, or even get some extra goodies, be sure to sign up on Patreon at www.patreon.com/thenerdcourse. With tiers starting as low as $1, you can help support this show and all the other shows. Be sure to follow our executive producers, Grayson Barker, a.k.a. @WarlordHitman98 on Twitter, and Shane at twitch.tv/SRRKK, or follow his Twitter @SRRKK Twitch. If you'd like to hear more from me, you can find me on the Nerd Course and the Gamer Course as co-hosts throughout the week. Thank you to all those who catch every episode, and for all the new listeners stopping by. I truly appreciate it. YoungYoda out.